Hello, everyone. There's a really good podcast out there on the Beatles called Something About the Beatles. And I was recently tipped off to a new show by them, a new episode, where the topic was about allegedly Peter Jackson changing the narrative and changing things that from the truth to something else in his fairly recent documentary, Get Back. And I listened to the podcast, or at least the latter half of it, because what they were doing near the end was they were going to present the original 40-minute raw, unedited conversation in the studio when George Harrison had quit for a while, and it was just a group of them sitting there. Among them were Paul and Ringo, Linda McCartney, Linda Eastman at the time, and the director Michael Lindsay Hogg, and they were discussing John not coming in that morning. You had George gone, and John wasn't in yet, and we didn't know if he was coming in. And they had like a little personal discussion there, kind of frank discussion about the elements of John and Yoko and what that was doing to the band and so forth. And also about George, would he ever come back and so forth. And it was put there out there by the podcast that they're going to prove, or more or less they thought, that by hearing the original dialogue, you're going to see that Peter Jackson actually misconstrued things and changed things. Now, among these things is a wonderful scene in the movie where Paul McCartney, you could see tears in his eyes as the camera kind of gets a little close to him, and they have a dialogue over there, Paul saying, and then there were two, meaning just himself and Ringo left. Well, supposedly that was altered too, and anyway, let's find out, right? So I listened to, as they suggested in the episode, listen to the end, and you'll this part here, the next 45 minutes, and you'll see or hear. So I listened, and after I listened, I came to the conclusion, I don't think Peter Jackson altered anything, to tell you the truth. That's just my opinion. Yours may vary, but now, sure, Peter Jackson is making a film, and naturally, when you make a film, you have to shorten things, right? I mean, you have to use snippets. You can't use the entire 45 minute dialogue scene. Not only would it be boring for most viewers, but you can't bog down a film by doing that. So obviously he only had to use snippets. Now, very nicely, when you listen to the show, they do kind of highlight the moments that were included in the actual release documentary and those that weren't, so you could hear which ones were used. And I think that although Peter Jackson obviously had to snip a lot of the dialogue out and couldn't use all of it, I think the general essence of the meeting and the mood and the tension and the problems facing the band were included. It was put forth that, a lot of stuff about Yoko was left out of that, There's a lot of stuff. There might have been a lot of stuff, negative things about Yoko left out of the entire film. I'm sure out of the entire project, all the footage that was around in 1969 for that, I'm sure there may have been some more unflattering Yoko bits that John and Yoko together, that the filmmaker chose to leave out. But I'm talking just about the last final the discussion here that's presented at the end of the episode, the conversation, and I just got the feeling from what I heard that was fully unedited and what Peter Jackson chose to use in his movie. You can hear them say that, Linda in particular saying, but basically Yoko did all the talking at the meeting we had recently. She spoke for John. I don't think John believed any of that, So you can hear, even in Jackson's finished product, that they still are saying that Yoko was kind of commanding everything for John and speaking for John. That doesn't get lost in any way. That's still there, So I don't know what people are talking about by saying, Yoko's kind of whitewashed, at least in that scenario, in that conversation. It's still obvious that John and Yoko are an item, and Paul even says in the finished version of Get Back, it's included, where he says, if it's either those two are in love, and if it's a choice between the Beatles or Yoko, it's Yoko for John. It's said in there. There's nothing done. Nothing different. Now, if you want to talk about that moment where Paul gets all emotional in the finished film and he says, and then there were two, and cry, tears coming in his eyes. Um, yeah, it's true that, as originally said, that line, and then there were two, was used as kind of as a punchline to something, and everybody laughed. They thought it was funny, and it was a more humorous thing. But Paul still said it, and it still rings true, and it still comes from someplace deep inside. Okay, maybe it wasn't used exactly where and how he said it with the laughing at the end, but it's still used to convey the tensions and the discomforts of the moment. All of it still holds up. I don't think the narrative was changed one bit the way Jackson did it. Not everything was included. Some things were out of sequence, but the thing is, the general germ of the feeling was still there. So that's my 2.5 cents on this. What are your thoughts, folks?